Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, and I am here with Robert King from Elsbeth. And this character, Carrie Preston, made into a real fan favorite on The Good Wife and The Good Fight. But when did you kind of know or get the idea that, okay, Elsbeth needed to be the central figure in her own story?
Uh, I would say when we brought her back after the third season on Good Wife, she was such a striking presence. And even then, there was this Columbo-like aspect to her, of her looking at the world slightly differently and not from a place of someone who's gone to the best college or gone to the best anything. She always seemed to be someone who was really underappreciated by people around her and usually the villains. So that just seemed good. And it seemed like a good idea after that. I don't think we really got serious until the pandemic when we were sitting around, Michelle and myself, my co-creator, showrunner, watching things and realized that, with all the options of streaming that we could have watched, we ended up going back to Columbo episodes because they were fun and made for good TV.
Yeah, something very comforting about it. And I think that's something that she has to her in this character because she has a lot of charm. There's a kind of naivete to her a little bit, but now she's dropped into these serious, very serious criminal investigations. What was kind of the most surprising result of mixing those two elements together?
Michelle and I, and also myself as a director, find the best way to dive into weird things is to just dive into them. And so that people are so used to like, okay, don't mix these foods, don't mix these colors or drama and comedy. It always seems like best to treat the 10-minute opening crime as the straight man to the the comedian who comes later. So it was that, and then probably when we were developing it, the directorial style was to do a cop show that Elsbeth or Carrie Preston kept sneaking into, like that she would come from the back row. There'd be a line of cops, and she would come from the back row, or she would lean into the side of the frame, so that you still had this like CBS procedural, but here's somebody who came in and kept interrupting it with her oddball sensibility.
That can be sort of tricky sometimes when you take a character who is the oddball and is built to be the supporting player, and then they have to command their own story. How did you kind of ensure that? Was there anything different that you had to do with Elsbeth that way?
Well, one thing by casting Wendell and Wendell's interest in it, having a real serious, heft to someone who gives strength to the fact that these are actual crimes. Because one of the things about Elsbeth is she doesn't really have a lot of compassion for people. She's someone who thinks of it kind she kind of thinks of it as a puzzle to be solved. So you don't have that usual thing to lean on with CBS procedurals where, oh, it's the heroes caring about the victim or caring about the loved one. It was like, well, that's not really Elsbeth. She's not really that. So I forgot your question, but I think that was a pretty good answer to some question. You can ask
Yes.
another question and you can fit that answer in.
Well, insert. Well, you mentioned Wendell Pierce. He's one of, many stage talents, Broadway talents that you utilize on this to great effect. Which your other two shows in this world were stomping grounds for a lot of Broadway performers, and now we still have like Jane Krakowski, Linda Lavin, Laura Benanti. What is the kind of the best part for you of bringing in that stage
Oh my
talent from New
God.
York?
They have so much respect for the writing. I don't even think I have as much respect for the writing as they do. I mean, they're really trying to understand the concept behind what you wrote. And they're willing to try anything because when I direct, I just like taking the words as a guide and now let's play with that. What is it? So let's ad lib something here, and shoot it, just not just do it as rehearsal, but I need to fill 5 minutes here. Go ahead or at the end of a scene. So there's that. There's also a real sense of strong presence to them. Sometimes they resist the explanatory dialogue aspect of a procedural, which is fun because they're more willing to lean into comedy and not treat it. Sometimes you don't want it treated as, this is the worst thing that can happen. This is sort of fun. I don't know. We've only had great experiences with theater actors. Not to, we use anybody who wants to play, but theater actors really do want to play and I think have a lot of fun.
Well, I think too, you mentioned before about the openings of a procedural, and I think that's uh such a key element is having this well-crafted opening scene that lures you in. This one in the pilot, Stephen Moyer is the acting teacher, and it's an incredible montage of him staging this suicide. How much tinkering and planning goes into executing a moment like that?
What oddly, the thing that got the most tinkering and planning was the stage work. Because there's a play going on, uh, uh, and he's timing it to do the crime or half the crime during the stage, and that really meant kind of what are the colors we're after. I really wanted a red. I hate saying the word palette, but I will say it. A red palette for the opening. I wanted something where there was a death on the stage, but then you see this kind of very Ocean's 11 like procedural of how he's setting up a crime, and that had to be very Hitchcockian in its camera use. I mean, I can't imagine when we last used handheld camera, and we rarely use Steadicam. It's always studio-based camera work, and it's to kind of give that kind of flowing quality to it. So we wanted to sense that, oh my God, how could Elsbeth ever solve this? Because this guy solved, figured out everything. And that meant this kind of precise camera work to make it work.
And Stephen Boyer plays a great villain. I think that's also something you need in those moments. What was the key in the casting process for figuring out an adversary for
Well,
Elsbeth?
with that, what really was lucky is obviously Carrie and Stephen had worked together before on True Blood. So a real affection between the two of them and a willingness to go into the darker areas of the characters. Because Carrie's character is doing it because he's sleeping with his students. And then when one's gonna, get him canceled, he kills her. So there's a strong reality to that kind of crime. So you needed someone who was willing to go with that Stephen was. And more importantly, Stephen seems like one of these James Bond villains in a way that you needed across from Carrie. Like he's thought of everything. And so then he's really surprised by someone who's as silly and as fritzy as Carrie is. But the most important thing was their affection for each other, I think, because they could really play mano a mano better than anyone.
Hmm. And I think something that also makes the show very specific and unique is that it leans into very New York stories. Like this is about an acting teacher. A lot of it just feels very of New York in that specificity. How did you kind of approach making the city its own character in the show?
Well, there was a lot of conversation with Fred Murphy, the DP, who we worked so long on Good Wife and Good Fight. And we have so much to react against with the show because what the argument for the show was it is a tourist view of New York. So we wanted most police procedurals go into alleys, go into the grit, the very blue, kind of faded blue look or a deep blue, like Bruckheimer kind of blues. And what we wanted was, okay, we're going to go to tourist attractions as much as we can. We're going to go to Rockefeller Center. We're going to get a view of New York that is beautiful. Because if you live here, you can find both. I mean, there's some places in Central Park that are some of the prettiest places in the world. So we always wanted it to be that. And then the murders themselves, strangely enough, had to be beautiful, had to be, there's an elegance to them. There's something, this is all happening in the richest rooms. That's not who Elsbeth is. Elsbeth is attracted to the trinket shops in Times Square. She buys for the Stephen Moyer character kind of a little Grammy or something or a little statue. She buys the shit that is what tourists would buy. So anyway, it's that difference between the New York as appreciated by someone who doesn't live there and sees everything as beautiful, and then the crime underneath it.
Well, it's a really incredible way to highlight New York and highlight this great character. So thank you for bringing Elizabeth to the forefront in her own series.
Thank you.